We're making a versatile meal that can be eaten at any point in the day, and it's packed with umami flavor. So if you're ready, it's about to get delicious in here. All right, so today we are making a tomato and egg scramble that we're gonna serve over some white rice. It's actually a dish that comes from Chinese cuisine. Again, it's the inspiration. I'm not following any sort of recipe specifically. Just to give you some backstory, I've been eating this actually pretty recently, the last week or two. I've been eating this occasionally for breakfast, sometimes as my last meal of the day around dinner time, like 8, 9 o'clock at night, just as something quick to whip up. It's got a ton of protein, it's got our carbs in the rice, and it actually tastes amazing. And I was inspired to make this a couple weeks ago. I was watching a video on YouTube while I was at home. It was on Mikey Chen's YouTube channel. He spent some time living in Boston. He went around to some of the restaurants that he liked to go to when he lived in the city. And there was a place in Chinatown, the Taiwan Cafe, that had this really good looking egg and tomato and beef scramble looking thing over some rice. It was saucy, had a ton of protein, ton of carbs. I looked at it and said, that looks like something that would fit my macros, would fit the way that I like to eat, something that I could make low calorie and healthy and delicious. So I'm gonna try to make it myself. I looked up a couple recipes. I pulled some different techniques and styles from a couple different recipes. So like I said, this is inspired by the traditional Chinese dish of tomato and eggs, and it's as simple as that sounds. It's tomato and eggs pretty much scrambled, fried up in a wok together. And I also took a secret ingredient that we'll touch upon later from J. Kenji Lopez Alt's YouTube channel. Actually, coincidentally, a couple days after I watched the video on Mikey Chen's YouTube channel, I was watching J. Kenji Lopez Alt, and he showed his recipe to make the creamiest, his best version of scrambled eggs, which I like a creamier scrambled egg more than like a dried out one. We'll get to that. Like, I like mine borderline undercooked, almost not cooked at all. Like, that's how creamy I like my eggs, but we'll get there when we get to it later. First, actually, I want to introduce a special guest. I know I've mentioned it a couple times, but my rice cooker, this is my home rice cooker here on the end of the table. Brought this thing in this morning. We've got some rice cooking, so we're going to serve some fresh white rice on the plate that we're going to serve this over. But I actually wanted to show you guys, I think I've mentioned it on here a few times. I know that I've mentioned this to a couple people in my personal life, that I wash my rice grains before I fill it up, before I fill the pot up with water and run the rice cooker. So I'm going to show you guys what I usually do, how I knock off some of that excess starch, and then we'll come back and we'll get into the rest of the recipe. All right, guys, so I've mentioned a couple times that I like to wash my rice a couple times to knock some of the excess starch off here. I've talked to a couple people recently who didn't know to do that, and it just helps the overall finished texture. It's a little less gummy with some of that starch off. So what I like to do is I've got this like perfect little colander thing that fits perfectly into the inside part of my rice cooker, the metal pot. And I usually put it over like this, and I just run it through until it's full and move it around so all the pieces of rice are getting wet. I like to use hot water as well, just to get the rice grains primed. And look at that water, how murky that is. That's after one wash. I'll show you what it looks like after the fourth wash, and I run it through 4 times. You can do it as many times as you want or as few times as you want. I think 4 is usually the perfect number. Fill it up, drain it. See how easy it is to just drain the rice after either. You don't have to worry about tipping the water out without losing the rice. So this is number 3. You can even get in there with your hands and just kind of agitate the rice a little bit. Number 3, and then 4. And now look at that water. Now there's still some starch in there, but it's far less murky and white as it was after the first wash. So we've knocked out most of that starch. Now if you're wondering how you finish the process, pour that in here. I've got 3 cups worth of rice in here, roughly speaking, 500 grams of weighed rice. And I just fill this up to, there's a little line in there that says number 3. You put it in your rice cooker, hit start, and that's all you got to do. So there you go. Like I said, I like to run that through 4 times-ish through the strainer with a little bit of water. Just get some of that excess starch off. I just like the consistency when that starch isn't there in the cooking process. And it also keeps your rice cooker cleaner, makes it easier to clean up and put away at the end. So now, let's get into our recipe today. Another simple one coming off of stir-fried cucumbers a couple weeks ago, which was super simple as well. We've got our beef, which we're gonna use as one of our main protein sources, split with a couple of eggs. So we've got a fattier protein source today than usual. Obviously, you've got the fat in the yolk of these eggs, and obviously this beef has some fat. This is the Walmart brand extra lean ground beef, 96% lean, 4% fat. It's my go-to when I'm going for super lean beef. Walmart always seems to have some of it in stock. The only time they ever really had some issues was during the pandemic, though, like the heart of the pandemic. But now every time you go into Walmart, they have it. Again, it's the purple label one, 96.4. This is 140 calories per 4 ounces raw weight, and that's how much we're gonna use today. And then I've got 18 eggs here because I ran out of eggs this morning, actually last night making my scramble. So I stopped in and I said, I'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We'll do this recipe today, and I'll get my, my twin 18 pack of eggs. So there's another one in the North TV fridge right now that's coming home with me. Obviously, we've got our tomatoes. We've got Roma tomatoes here, again, picked up from Walmart. We've got some garlic, again, an aromatic, adding a little bit of flavor as well. We've got our green onion, aromatic. We've got some teriyaki sauce. And we've got salt, pepper, and then our secret ingredient for our eggs, which is gonna be the cornstarch. So, with that being said, let's get right into it.
With that being said, let's get right into it.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna break down a green onion. We've done this a couple times before on this show. Nothing really special here. We're gonna cut the green leafy end from the fibrous white end, and then we're going to back slice this. And lately Walmart has these monstrous, these things are so thick recently, these scallions, and I actually really like it. You can smell already that oniony flavor that we're gonna get imparted into our final dish. And we're gonna slice these up. Again, thin medallions. I mean, you don't have to worry about being like super consistent or anything like that. It's not that big of a deal if they're different sizes. They're all going into the pan. They're gonna cook down for a while. So again, we're back slicing. We're trying not to bust up the cell walls of these too much. So when I say back slice, you can see I've got the tip of the knife touching the cutting board, and I'm pulling the knife without really changing that angle back towards me and slicing the onion that way. Again, I learned that from J. Kenji Lopez Alt on his YouTube channel. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. It's not that big of a deal. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on get our hot plate turned up to like 4. In between 3 and 4. Medium heat is what I like to go on when I'm at home on my normal range, on my normal gas burner. It's right on, dead on medium. And we're just gonna get these in here while we're getting everything else ready. So those kind of cook down a little bit. Those need a little extra time to break down. Next thing we're gonna do, let's actually go into our tomatoes. Today, I have 4 tomatoes. I'm going to use 1. I bought 4 extra just because I wasn't sure if I was going to use 2 today, and then I wanted some extras for later on, and I think the bowl just looks better with 4 in there. So what we're doing here is we cut our tomato in half, then we're going to cut it into quarters, and then there's the stem end here that we're just going to V-cut out because that's a tough texture. You don't want to be eating that. So just carefully go in there with your knife and just slice that out like so. Right there, you can see it's that little, there's a little green end in there. And we're just gonna cut that root part out. Our rice cooker is going right now. The beauty of this thing, I've mentioned it a few times, as soon as it's done cooking, it will flip up to warm mode. It'll keep your rice warm. So if you wanna prepare some rice well ahead of time, while you're making dinner and you want it as a side, you don't really have to worry about it. So we've cut it into 4ths. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna cut it into 1/8. And this is another area where we're taking a detour away from traditional preparation of this recipe. Normally, they cut a little X in the top of the tomato, then they boil the tomatoes to peel the skin off. I don't want to take the time to do that. I haven't done it before, so I don't do it. If you want to do that, you can go right ahead, but I don't think it makes that big of a difference. So we've cut our tomatoes into 1/8 now, these wedges, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to turn them sideways and just cut them into 1/16 like this, because I just think it's a little easier to eat. But I want them to still be big and chunky because they're a key component in our dish. So let's, for now, wait on putting these into the pan We're gonna let that warm up a little more, and I'll know when we start to hear that sizzling. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna head over to our garlic, fresh garlic today. We're just gonna add a little bit. And again, because there's so few ingredients in this recipe today, I think it's good to use fresh garlic rather than minced, stored in oil or water, or use garlic powder or something like that. If you want to use those things to get the garlic flavor in there, go right ahead. So I'm going to separate a couple cloves here and as soon as we're done separating these, we'll put the tomatoes in because our onions are starting to go a little bit. So let's maybe go one more clove here. Use as much or as little garlic as you'd like. It's totally up to you. If you don't want to use it at all, certainly fine. Again, if you've watched this show, which I think this is episode 9. It might be episode 10. I think it's episode 9. But if you've watched all of them, first of all, thank you. Second of all, there's better cooking shows to watch on the internet than this, but I appreciate you taking the time. No, seriously, thank you guys for watching, and don't watch anybody else. Come on, we have a lot of fun here. So, our garlic. We've broken down garlic once on this show. I want to say it was it might have been for Mappa tofu. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll go over it again. Peel it, then we're going to crush it. So flat end of your knife on the garlic, push down on it. This does a couple things. It helps that first layer of skin separate from the garlic flesh that we want to get to. And it also crushes the cell walls, which releases a compound called allicin, which adds to that flavor. Allicin in lacrimator, which is, we've learned on this show, is the agent that makes your eyes cry when you're cutting onions. They're actually the same, in the same family of compounds. They're in between the cell walls of these vegetables. And when you break them down, either through crushing them or cutting an onion, they're released. Allicin doesn't have that teary-eyed effect, though it does turn in to a pretty sticky substance. So if you're ever dealing with garlic, you got to be ready to wash your hands afterwards because it gets pretty sticky pretty quickly. So again, we're crushing this garlic. My hand's already sticky from doing just those first couple. Our green onions are going pretty good right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our tomatoes in. And we're going to turn the heat down just a little bit. Hot! Too hot! Just going to move these around. And we're going to let those go for a little bit. Just break down a little bit. I've turned that down to like 1 because that's hotter than I want. And with tomatoes, doesn't matter how you're using your tomatoes, always remember, salt them. So I've got some pink Himalayan salt that I'm just going to sprinkle on top of our Roma tomatoes. You can use whatever type of tomato you want. I like these Romas. I think they've got a really nice flavor to them. We're going to quickly come back to our garlic here, and then we're going to finish off peeling this. We're actually not that far away from being done. Like we're moving pretty well. And I'm just going to roughly chop up a couple of these cloves of garlic. Oh, that smells fantastic. We've talked about the smell of garlic and the taste of garlic on the show. It's great. And we're just going to roughly, chop these up. It's not going to be the prettiest thing in the world. Nothing on the show is the prettiest thing in the world. If that's what you're going for, this is not the show nor the place for you to be. So I'm actually going to end up doing like 2 cloves of garlic because these are pretty big. So again, we're just going to remove that last bit of skin because we've already crushed these. Crush these down a little bit. Boom, it should come off pretty easily once you get a big chunk of it. And then I just cut there's like a knob end off. And then just cut them into thin rounds like so. And then you can just roughly chop the rest of it down. Okay. And we're going to save this to put into the stir fry in a little bit. So we're just going to do that like so, and just you can roughly chop this like that. There you go. And again, I'm using like this lever technique. I'm putting pressure on the tip of the knife and just going in like a chopping motion. I'm not that good at it. If you see people who are professionals and are trained and have knife skills, they can do that and like cut up a bunch into little diced pieces super quickly. So let's move around our tomatoes as these are going. Those are starting to look pretty good. Turn our pan down even a little bit. We're gonna let those go for just a little bit longer. This is a perfect time now to crack our eggs and mix those up. So again, crack your eggs on a flat surface. You crack it on the edge of a pan or on the edge of a bowl, more than likely you're gonna get shell into the bowl. So this is not the best table to crack eggs on. I think we tried to crack an egg on here for gyudon and I had some trouble, but there was a good one right there. That's good. Boom, we got these like so. I'm just gonna grab a tissue from offset here to wipe my hands off of that egg yolk. And then, so we've got our eggs. We're gonna take some of this cornstarch here, about half a teaspoon cornstarch. And this is just gonna help the final texture, and it also gives you a little bit of leeway with eggs. As you all know, with scrambled eggs, they can overcook and dry out really quickly. And this cornstarch actually helps retain some of the moisture through the cooking process. So you don't have to baby them as much as you do a good scrambled egg that you're not trying to overcook and keep nice and soft. So you can just add it in, mix your eggs up like so. Those are gonna be ready to go into the pan in a minute. Let's add our beef to the party. That's again our 96.4 lean ground beef. We're gonna do some pepper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cracks of pepper. That's what I found to be manageable with that pepper grinder. A little bit of salt on our beef because it didn't get salted with our tomatoes. Again, using pink Himalayan salt, but you could totally use regular table salt or whatever salt you have, sea salt, that's fine. Just use whatever you have available or whatever you like to use. And we're just going to now cook this beef through. And again, I like to break it up and start to kind of mix all this stuff in together. And this floppy spatula is good, but it's not the best. It's a little too floppy for my liking, but for what we have, it'll be totally fine. So mix these things up. And we're gonna let our beef get going a little more before we add our egg in there. So now, at this point, we're in pretty good shape. Our beef is in, our tomatoes are cooking down, our green onions, the white part of our scallions, our green onions, are cooking down. They're giving off their flavor. And we're just kind of mashing up our beef and letting that cook through. The thing with ground beef is you wanna make sure you cook it all the way through in the grinding process. So if you're cooking a steak, you don't have to cook it all the way through. You can leave it a little pink. When you grind it up, it moves the bacteria around from the surface into the middle. So you gotta make sure you cook your ground beef all the way through. That's just a little tip for you at home. If you're making burgers too from ground beef, you gotta remember to do that. I don't think, you can risk it if you want. I mean, it's not like chicken if you undercook it, but my advice is to cook your ground beef all the way through. So we're just gonna let this go a little longer. And that was, again, 4 ounces raw weight of ground beef. And we're just gonna, again, we're just managing the heat in this pan a little bit. Let that cook like so. Now, alternative, if you don't wanna use ground beef, actually usually at home, I use like eye round or top round, a thin cut, lean piece of beef that will clock in somewhere between usually like 170 and 190 calories per serving, depending on the cut. You can cube that up and throw that in there as well and use that as your beef source. That's totally fine. You can throw a little meat tenderizer on there if you want to help that kind of break down, because it's so lean, it's gonna be a touch tougher, but if you time everything right, it'll come out fine. Our beef is looking pretty good at the moment. So we're gonna get in here with our big hunks of garlic, and we're gonna let those cook just a little bit. Be careful with these garlic. Garlic can burn, and it ends up tasting not that great if you let it get to that point. Oh, a little bit of cooked beef, that cooked tomato, the green onion, the garlic now in there. If you don't like that smell, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem, because this smells unbelievable, and it's gonna taste unbelievable. And again, we're gonna finish this off over our rice, which isn't quite cooked yet, but I'm hoping I timed it right, where our rice is done right when our stir fry is ready. We might be a couple minutes early though, because again, you can see how quick this recipe is. This doesn't take very long. So after a busy, long day of work, especially with the way our schedule's been at North TV lately, with so many night events, this is a really easy, delicious meal to cook up in a couple of minutes that uses most of these ingredients you're going to have laying around the house. So we've got our 2 eggs mixed in with our ½ teaspoon of cornstarch. We're going to get that in. And you're going to see how kind of runny and bouncy and moist our eggs are going to end up being. And I like to just keep my eggs moving. I don't let them sit for too long because, again, I don't like runny, wispy, overcooked strands or anything like that. I like a nice, soft, scrambled egg when I'm going for scrambled eggs. I'm pretty particular about the consistency that I like. Again, some people could say over or undercooked. I think we've talked about it on the show. The inside of eggs are actually pretty sterile. I think it's like 99.9% of the time they're pretty sterile. The outside of the egg is actually where most of the bacteria comes from, which makes sense. Again, a chicken is laying the egg. They're not really doing anything to the inside of the egg. So, you know, don't take my word as law, but that's according to an Alton Brown video, Good Eats video that I watched actually not that long ago. But look at the texture and the consistency of these eggs. Now, when you're scrambling eggs, like I said, I like to keep it moving. And if you were on a gas range and you feel like the process is moving too quick, everything's overcooking, pull it off the heat. The pan's still hot, and you can manage it here off heat for a little bit to make sure everything stays the way that you want it. You're still, if you were on a gas burner, you'd still be getting some heat hitting up on the bottom of this, but not as much as if you had it directly on top of the flame. So that's a little tip when you're scrambling eggs. Manage your heat, and that will help you cook your eggs the way that you want them. And we're not that far away from being done. And again, I'm gonna pull it right there. I'm just gonna keep them moving. Again, trying to avoid overcooked strands. And that, to me, is looking pretty darn good. Our rice is not quite done. The timing, not right, but the beautiful thing about editing is the timing is always perfect. So in 2 seconds, you'll see me plating this bad boy up when that rice is done.
Well, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
All right, so our rice cooker just flipped over from cooked to warm. That means that's good to go. Our scramble is just about good to go. That actually gave me a little bit of time to remember that we're gonna put a tablespoon of teriyaki sauce in here. This can be soy sauce. I have a roasted garlic teriyaki sauce from Kikkoman's that's actually really good with this, but we added in that fresh garlic in here, so we should be fine without that. I'm gonna do like a tablespoon, and I gotta remember to move our pan back into frame. Drizzle that over there, just that extra little bit of sauciness, that extra little bit of flavor. Do a little toss here. Look at this. It looks great. It smells great. A lot of umami flavor, roasted garlic, cooked down onions, tomatoes that are going to add just a little bit of sweetness, a little herbaceousness in there. We've got beef that we season very simply. Beef is beef. It tastes great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to our scale. As I'm going to turn that off, I don't want to leave those eggs on there. Let me just get my scale shifted over here. Pop this top off. That's hot. Be careful when you take your top off of your rice cooker. Still waiting for Zojirushi to hook us up here at North TV. So if anybody from Zojirushi is watching or anybody knows anybody, send us that rice cooker. We're waiting. All right. Anyways, back to the show. Back to me not panhandling pretty much. So we're going to do like 190 grams cooked rice. That's my standard amount, which is about, I think it ends up being like 80. It's 80 something raw weight. The conversion for rice once it's cooked it's more of a pain than it needs to be, because I know that 500 grams of raw weight rice usually cooks up to like 1,125 or 1,150 grams. Then you can do the conversion on how many calories and carbs and all that there. But we're going to do that right there. Spread this out wide. As everybody knows, if you know over rice dishes, you want to get that spread out nice and wide. Let it be ready to receive what we're going to give to it, which, let's put this out here so you guys can see. So we've got our bed of rice. We're going to get our beautiful beef, egg, tomato scramble right over top. The moisture still in there, still rocking, still ready to roll. I've said this a few times on the show. Sometimes this stuff doesn't look super, super, super pretty, but it's got a bunch of color in there. I think that looks great. And then just for a little garnish on top, because, you know, just for that little added bit of flair, flavor, color, we're just going to sprinkle on some of the leafy end of the scallion. And look at that, guys. We have got an over-rice dish that you could eat for breakfast, you could eat for lunch, you could eat for dinner. You saw how simple it was to make. You can have this thing ready in a pinch. So whether it's the first thing you do when you wake up or it's the last thing you do after a long day of work right before you go to bed, make yourself this scramble, serve it over some white rice. If you don't want rice as your carb source, use whatever you want. You could put this thing on the plate as is and eat this thing up like it's a regular scramble, but this is so good. We've got teriyaki in there, beef, egg, tomato, green onion, garlic, simple, smells great, tastes great. I'm telling you guys, try this, make it at home. And this comes in at roughly 630 calories. Obviously a little higher than what we usually do, probably about 50 calories higher than most of our dishes, just because we have a little more fat content in here from the whole eggs and from the beef. Even though our beef is low percentage of fat, you still get a little in there. And we know 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So a little higher in calories, but this is not gonna break your bank if it's budgeted in your diet, and it's gonna taste fantastic. So I can't wait any longer. I'm gonna get into this, guys. Try this at home. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for tuning in to another edition of Delicious and Nutritious.